Hi, folks. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Renaissance and how it came to England. And while France and Italy and Germany are known for their inventors and their artists during the Renaissance, England's known a little bit more for literary work and also their interesting leadership that they had and a big change that they're going to have in the church. And that is where I'd like to start with the English Renaissance. The first thing is that right during the time period of the Renaissance, there was a civil war. And the Civil War was known as the War of the Roses. It was the white roses against the red roses. The white rose was the House of York, and the red rose was the House of Lancaster, and the House of Lancaster was represented by a group of people who had the family name Tudor, Tudor. Well, the red win, and the guy that won the war was known as Henry VII. And Henry VII isn't really terribly important to history other than that he won this war. His eyes sort of look funny in this painting, and that also he had two sons. His older son was named Arthur, and he was supposed to be the king. He was 15. He was married to a princess from Spain whose name was Catherine of Aragon, and they were going to combine the Spanish kingdoms with the English kingdoms, being king and queen of both. However, Arthur died at the age of 15 because of tuberculosis, which is a disease that affects your lungs, and it left his younger brother next in line, whose name was, oh, here's Arthur, sorry. He died at age 15, and it left this guy next in line. His name was Henry VIII. He did not look like this when he was 10 years old, but he became the heir apparent, and he really did not even want to aspire. He never really aspired to be the king. He knew that he had the older brother and that the older brother was going to be the man, and that he had planned to go into the clergy to become a monk. So then his father dies when he's at the age of 18, and so he does become king. He has a marriage arranged with his brother's widow, so it's the same girl. It's King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella's daughter. Her name is Catherine, and she was a little bit older because remember she was engaged to his older brother and actually married to his older brother. She never actually became the queen though because Henry VII was still alive. She was like the heir to be the queen. And so eventually, when this all shakes out, when Henry VII dies and Arthur dies, Henry VIII is 18 years old. He gets married to Catherine of Aragon, and he becomes the king of England. She was older than him, but looking for love. However, he was young, dashing, extremely athletic, and now he was the king. So this is Catherine of Aragon. The marriage was arranged, of course. They were married for 24 years, and the goal for kings during this time is to have male children, as many male children as they can, because you are trying to have heirs to the throne, and you need backups in case one of them dies. Remember, this is still, the end of the Middle Ages, beginning of the Renaissance. Life expectancy is still not very long. There's no cure for like certain infections and certain diseases still, and so you want to have as many heirs in place as you can. So all he wants is a male child from this woman. However, because she's older, and also just because of biological issues, she has 6 pregnancies. Only one of them delivers a live baby. And as luck would have it, or I guess as bad luck would have it, it's a girl. And they name her Mary. And so eventually, after 24 years go by of all these, failed pregnancies and just not being able to produce a male heir, Henry decides that he does not want to be with Catherine of Aragon anymore. So he sends Pope Clement the Seventh, which everybody in England is Catholic at this point, and asks him if he can get a divorce. And he says, "Listen, she's not providing any male, offspring for me. It's just not working out. Can I get a divorce in the eyes of the Catholic Church?" Well, back then, especially, divorce was a no-no in the Catholic Church, and so the Pope denied it. He said, "Listen, you can't divorce this poor woman just because she can't give you any male children." So Henry says, "Listen, this is what I'm going to do, Pope. I'm going to divorce her, and I'm going to find a new wife. And if you don't like it, tough." Well, Clement sent a letter back and said, "Listen, if you do that, I'm going to excommunicate you." Well, Henry went ahead and called his bluff and did it. The Pope excommunicated Henry VIII, and so then Henry started his own church, a Protestant church, so a church that's Christian but not Catholic, in England called the Church of England. I know, original name, right? That's called the Anglican Church today. So Mary and Catherine of Aragon are sent away, and Henry is excommunicated by the Pope. So wife number 2 comes along, and her name's Anne Boleyn. and she actually got pregnant right away. Unfortunately for Henry, guess what? It's a girl, and so they named her Elizabeth after Henry's mom. And she becomes pregnant again very quickly right afterwards, and Henry is very excited because he has this feeling. He knows that it's going to be a boy. Well, first wife Catherine is very sick. She has some form of cancer. And on the day of her funeral, Henry, and this is karma coming back to get Henry, by the way, Henry falls off his horse and he's hurt in a hunting accident. And so Anne is so upset and so stressed that she goes into premature labor and she miscarries. She gives birth to a dead baby, a fetus, and it's only 4 months old. And 4 months old would be hard to survive in today's modern medicine. And back then, the baby would never survive. And you'll never believe what this dead baby is. It's a male. And so Henry is very upset. It's the beginning of the end of their relationship. Henry declares that the marriage is cursed because all this happened on the day of wife number one's funeral. And so he makes up some trumped up criminal charge against Anne Boleyn. He said that she was, having an affair with like some other men that were part of the king's court. They forced some poor guy to come in and confess that he was having an affair with her. None of it was true. She was sentenced to She was charged with treason, found guilty, and sentenced to death. And so this poor lady's actually beheaded, and she's done nothing wrong. Her famous quote is that right before she was killed, she said, "The axeman shall have not much trouble, for I have such a small little neck." So now we got to go to wife number 3, and her name is Jane Seymour. Only 11 days after Anne's execution, and supposedly this woman is the one that he truly loved. He's buried next to her, so if that means anything, if you're going to end up with 6 wives and you pick one to be buried beside, he picks her. But probably the reason why he loved her so much is that she gave him what he'd been looking for his entire life, a boy. And so she gave birth to Henry's only son. They named him Edward VI. The only problem with Jane Seymour is that when they figured pretty much that she was carrying a boy, she was giving signs that they thought she was carrying a boy, Henry did not want to chance a regular birth. And so they actually had a surgical procedure that today is very common. 2 of my children were born this way. It's called cesarean section, sometimes just basically called a C-section. And if you ask your parents about this, especially your mom, she probably will be able to tell you about a C-section, and maybe you might have even been born this way. But it's basically an incision is made in the mother's stomach, and the baby is removed that way than for coming out the natural, method. And many historians believe that Jane Seymour's cause of death is likely because of infection, because of the C-section ordered by Henry to prevent something happening to this baby. And so here's this woman, the one that supposedly he truly loved, and he more than likely probably caused her death by trying to have the baby removed from her stomach by a C-section instead of just waiting and being patient to have the baby born in a more natural way. So now she's dead. So now they arrange a marriage with the Germans. This woman's name was Anne of Cleves. Henry did not meet her until his wedding night, and he called her a horseface. He called her the Flanders, because this is the region from Germany she was from. He called her the Flanders mare. Right before he married her, he said to a friend, "I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse." What a jerk this guy is. He had the marriage annulled after 7 months. He ended up sending her back to Germany. There was no love in this marriage at all, and Henry just could not do it. At this point, Henry is getting pretty old. Henry is 50 years old, and because of his accident that he had while hunting, he is starting to not be able to work out, not be able to participate in his athletic events. And so he is really, starting to grow in size as far as like being heavy. He ended up having a 56-inch waistline. Now mine, and I'm a larger than average male, my waistline is 36 inches, and his was 56, so it's like 2 of me almost inside his pants, and over 300 pounds. He also needed mechanical lifts to help him move, but he was the king, and he needed a new wife, and so he did what males sometimes do. Once they reach middle age, they realize that they need to find a trophy wife, and so that is what he did. He found this young woman named Catherine Howard. He was 50, she was only 17, but she became quickly repulsed. He had a festering, stinking leg wound that needed to be drained daily. He had boils all over his body. He was over 300 pounds, and she actually did commit adultery. She had like a boyfriend on the side. Henry found out, and he had her beheaded. Of course, I started thinking about people having trophy wives, and this guy owned 84 Lumber. His name's Ed Hardy. Ed Hardy. He owns Nemacolin Woodlands. This woman worked at Nemacolin, and he met her there. He was 82 years old. She was 22 when they got married. They are no longer together, but as you can see, this is something that is sort of what Henry VIII did, found a woman much younger than him, and oftentimes this is called like the trophy wife or whatever. But this isn't even the worst case. This is the worst one. This guy's name is Howard. I know all you're saying, oh, this guy's name is Howard Marshall, and he was late 80s when he married Anna Nicole Smith, who was a model. She was 22 years old when they got married, and of course he was a multi-millionaire, and that's probably what she saw in the whole deal. He died right after they got married, and she received almost half of his fortune. His family, previous family, got the other half, and she became very famous. However, she died of a drug overdose about 10 years afterwards. So we need wife number 6, and she's the last one. Her name's Catherine Parr, and she was married to Henry for 4 years before he eventually died. One of the interesting things about Catherine Parr is that she helped Henry reconcile with his children, Mary and Elizabeth. Remember, they had sent Mary away, because she was Catholic, and Elizabeth who had been estranged from Henry as well. Remember, because Elizabeth's mom was beheaded. If you remember, it was Anne Boleyn. Wife number 2. So here are the wives of Henry VIII. Here's an easy way to remember them. So if we go from left to right and top to bottom, starting with Catherine of Aragon, going to Anne Boleyn, then Jane Seymour, and then Anne of Cleves. If I could sort of give you this little mnemonic device that I remember from my high school history teacher: divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. That's a good way to remember what happened to the wives of Henry VIII. Divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. So let's talk about what happened to the kids. I guess I can talk about Henry's death first. He did die at the age of 55, which is a little bit more than average time for somebody to live during this time period. The reasons for death were that he was extremely overweight, that the wound on his leg was infected and spread to his bloodstream, and also, and this is going to be a shocker, historians believe that he had an STD, which is a sexually transmitted disease, and they believe it was probably syphilis. And you'll learn about this in health class next year if you don't know about syphilis as it is right now. But sexually transmitted disease, syphilis, is still around today, and if you don't get it treated, it can lead to hallucinations and also to death. And it can be treated with antibiotics today, but of course that wasn't around back then, and Henry ends up dying from a combination of syphilis, overweight, and the infection that he had. His last words were, "Monks, monks, monks." So let's go ahead and talk about little Eddie. Eddie was only 9 years old when his dad died, and so he did have regents that worked with him, but he was always very sickly. He had the disease that his uncle had, Arthur, tuberculosis, which is a disease that affects your lungs. Your lungs are constantly being filled with sputum, and so he dealt with bloody cough and fever his almost entire life, and he did die. He died at the age of 15. So now, who gets the throne? Well, it's going to have to be the oldest girl. And so the oldest girl, and this is from marriage number 1, was named Mary. But Mary is a very strict and conservative Catholic. So when she comes back and takes the throne, Henry had everybody switch to Protestantism. She forced everybody back to becoming a Catholic. And so she ends up forcing Catholicism. She executed people that still practiced the Anglican Church or the Church of England. And for this, she's given the nickname Bloody Mary. And of course, I do know that there's an alcoholic drink called Bloody Mary as well, starring tomato juice, which gives it this nice, bright, bloody sort of color. She married Prince Philip II of Spain, which is a Catholic, country, and so it angered Protestants throughout England. She did die at the age of 42. Probably ovarian cancer, but she desperately tried to have children to keep her half-sister Elizabeth off the throne. Now remember, Elizabeth is the child from marriage number 2, and so she is a Protestant, and she is part of the Church of England, and Mary does not want her to get the throne. But Mary cannot have any children, probably because of this ovarian cancer, and she dies. And so then the next oldest kid is Elizabeth I, and she ends up becoming a great queen. Oh, by the way, the state in the United States called Maryland is named after Mary Tudor. It was settled by Catholics coming over from England, and so they named it Maryland. Elizabeth I is daughter number 2 from the second marriage, and she is a Protestant. She becomes queen when she's only 25 years old, and she was superb. As a matter of fact, the current Queen of England is named after her. She's Elizabeth II, but Elizabeth I reigned for 44 years. She turned England into a world power. The English Navy had a huge, huge upset victory over King Philip II of Spain. He sent the dreaded and feared Spanish Armada into the English Channel to defeat the English Navy, and somehow they ended up winning. The English set their own ships on fire and sailed them into the Spanish fleet and caused, the Spanish fleet to catch on fire, and gunpowder exploded, and it was a huge, huge upset for the English. She gave a very famous speech right before the naval battle saying that she has the body of a weak and feeble woman, but she has the heart and stomach of a king of England. And it was a very famous speech she gave and got these guys all fired up, and they went out and ended up winning this battle. We do have a state here in the United States that's named after Elizabeth, so I'd like to give you a second to think about the states. And it would have to be a colony, of course, because it was one of the original 13 colonies. So you're like thinking. There's no colony or no state named Elizabeth. That's because it's her nickname that caused the state to be named. And her nickname was, excuse me, I mean to cough in your ear. Her nickname was the Virgin Queen, because she was never married. And she did not get married on purpose, because the second she gets married, the second she gets married, her husband becomes the king, and then she has to listen or share power. And she did not want that. So her nickname was the Virgin Queen. So now I'm guessing you do know what state is named after her. It is Virginia. So I guess when West Virginia split away from Virginia, so there's kind of like 2 states that are named after her. She died of old age at the age of 69, and then her cousin James VI of Scotland came and took over, and he became the last Tudor king of that family, last of the Tudors. Last thing I want to talk about is this guy, William Shakespeare. He became famous, obviously, in literature, writing poems and plays. You'll read his work next year when you get to 8th grade. It's part of the curriculum, Midsummer Night's Dream, I believe, that you're going to read. That is part of William Shakespeare. And the Tudors, because he supported the Tudors, created a theater for him to have his plays performed in, and it was called the Globe Theater. And so you'll learn about that next year. Very famous theater where William Shakespeare's plays were performed. That's it. Thank you for listening to me. One time, say it with me. Divorced, beheaded, and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived.